I am Charlotte Casseraghi, and in partnership with the House of Chanel, I present to you the Les Rencontres podcast. As part of the Rendez-vous littéraire at Rue Cambon, this podcast spotlights the birth of a female writer. You can listen to the various episodes and their authors on your preferred streaming platforms.
Happy Saturday. It's May 18th, 2024, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in London.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
In New York, it's been another good week for those who relish the amalgamation of news and entertainment. Donald Trump's hush money trial continued with testimony from Michael Cohen. Once Trump's lawyer, Cohen is now his nemesis. Meanwhile, Trump is headed off to Florida for his son Barron's high school graduation. In Slovakia, the polarizing Prime Minister Robert Fico is still in intensive care after an assassination attempt by a 71-year-old poet. It's assumed that this was politically motivated, and for many, it's yet another sign of how fraught and divisive relations have become in Europe, especially among right-wing populists and progressives. In Washington, we have some debate news. Biden and Trump have agreed to face off twice on June 27th and September 10th. Biden's team hopes that getting out there will help the president, who's been trailing in the polls. Negotiations about the specifics of the debates continue, but one thing is for sure, there will be no third-party candidates. Sorry, RFK Jr. Meanwhile, Michael, isn't it so strange to see his wife, Cheryl Hines, back on TV? She's in the last season of Curb Your Enthusiasm. Anyway, I digress. Airmail is the antidote for all of this, and we have an incredible issue to talk about right now.
Absolutely. Yes, Can. It is in full swing in the south of France, and one of the big stories everyone is following concerns Francis Ford Coppola. 45 years after he won the Palme d'Or for Apocalypse Now, he's back with his latest film, Megalopolis. He has spent $120 million of his own money on it, and he's at the festival looking for a distributor. Our own Sam Wasson, who is a master of all things about movies, will tell us how one of the titans of movie making has found himself hat in hand there. Then, Stu Heritage will join us from the UK, where he will tell us about a situation of a different sort that you do not want to find yourself in. We're talking about being a guest at what is known to be perhaps the worst hotel in Great Britain, a cozy little place where you will find bloodstained sheets, smashed windows. It's kind of a cross between Sweeney Todd and Fawlty Towers. And finally, we have the incredible story of an American woman from Minnesota who discovered she is the secret daughter of an Italian banker and senator who cavorted with Jackie Onassis, Princess Margaret, and was the face of the 1970s jet set. It's an amazing story by James Eli Schiffer you will not want to miss. So Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
We only have one choice, Michael. We have to get Sam Wasson on here. He's a writer at large for Airmail and the author of many marvelous books about Hollywood, including my favorite, The Path to Paradise, a Francis Ford Coppola story. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, guys. Thank you.
Okay, so Sam, this has not been an especially direct path to get this movie up onto the screen. So take us back. What's the concept for Megalopolis and how did we get here?
It's a story about a man who has a vision for the future. And it's a great vision for the future. And it's opposed by the countervailing forces of corporate greed and Ludditism and everything that could hold back a utopian idea. And in that sense, it's an autobiographical story. It's very much about Francis, his vision for Zoetrope Studios, and all the many other great progressive ideas he's had for the movie business and for the world that have been thwarted. So this is a movie that he has been working on in some form for literally 40 years and pretty aggressively. Some people, they say they've been working on something for years, but really they just touch it once every 22 months. Francis keeps coming back to this. It's been a novel. It's been a radio play. He even started some second unit photography around 9/11, and that shut down production. Finally, he sold the vineyard. He sold off a piece of the vineyard. Well, I should say before that, no one was going to finance this movie. They thought it was outrageous. They didn't know it was many millions of dollars. It didn't fit comfortably into a genre. It was experimental, all these things that scare Hollywood. So Francis finally just said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to sell off a piece of my winery. And also, the state of the world is such that it demands a movie that's about reflecting on a better world. So it is a post-Trump movie. It's a post-winery movie. Now, here we are. The movie has been made. No U.S. distributor is going for it.
Who's in it? It seems like we've got some star power attached, no?
Who's in it? It's an eclectic cast. It's Adam Driver. There's a small part for Dustin Hoffman, Jon Voight, Jason Schwartzman, Talia Shire, Aubrey Plaza, Shia LaBeouf.
How did we end up here, Sam? I mean, like here you've got this guy, he's hat in hand at Cannes. What I love about your story this week is you make this very passionate plea. He gave a preview, as you note, in LA some weeks ago to executives. He got crickets. Number one, why did he get crickets from U.S. studios? And tell us some of your ideas for who should be stepping up here.
Well, the screening, people are divided on this movie. That's not a knock against it. It seems to have a lot in it that's new and challenging, and that suggests a divisive experience. And of course, U.S. distributors or any distributors are not obligated to distribute anything. It's their prerogative to say, we don't see an audience for this movie. On the other hand, there does seem to be a sort of general shrug of resignation around this in Hollywood, having spoken to a lot of people who are at the screening. And that's what really fires me up, that there's no effort, there's no creative community, there's no attempt by the movie business, the American movie business, Hollywood, to say, we've got a tricky one here, but it's Francis Ford Coppola, and he put 140 of his own millions into this movie, and let's try to find a way to make this happen as a community. If we can't do that for Francis Ford Coppola, who are we going to do it for? And if we can't do that for anyone, then who are we? So I think this cuts to the existential vacuum that's in the center of the movie business right now. Again, it's not to say it's easy. It's not to say that this is a no-brainer. This is tough. But David O. Selznick would have found a way. Mike Todd would have found a way. Distribution is not, for those who are gifted at it, is not as easy as color by numbers. And this is not that. So let's see some creativity here. That's what the piece is about.
Well, I love your idea that among the many ideas you have is George Lucas, for God's sake. I mean, or even the studios, which in this past week, Iger and Zaslav came together like, let's all bundle and put our big pot of money together and get the NBA right. So they've got ideas on how to make money, and no one's saying this is a charity. And yet, you're right, it's existential. Who are we?
Who are we? I have to believe that famous people, Ryan Gosling, Margot Robbie, people who are interested, seem to be invested in the fate of Hollywood, the fate of a movie, would devote an afternoon of their time or an hour of their time to go on television on one of these talk shows with Francis. Endorse this movie. That would be a huge boon to advertising. So where is everyone? Because it's not just Francis, it's the future of the movie business and this community. I would think people could pull it together. Why don't they want to?
It's like Chinatown all over again. I don't know.
It's Chinatown all over again. I mean, is it that they don't care? Is it that they don't care enough? Is it that they're too caught up in their own dramas? Is it that no one suggested it to them?
Until they read your story, Sam.
Hopefully that's the idea. It's not outlandish what I'm saying. I mean, get this bill through Congress.
Sam, let's go inside Coppola's head for a moment, because the pressure's now on for this to, 1, be an incredible movie, 2, to make some money, and 3, to bring him the accolades and attention that we all know as one of the world's great filmmakers of all time he deserves. What do you think he's feeling like these days?
This is not the first time Francis has been frustrated and alone. So it's more of the same. I suspect this one hurts a little bit more, only because he's put more money into it and the buildup has been a little bit stronger and the opposition has been a little more dramatic. Francis is already working on his next picture. He's a great teacher in how to survive in that way. He's not getting bogged down. He's going to Cannes, and he's also grieving. I mean, he just lost Eleanor, his wife, and so his world is bigger than this. Also, I think he might have expected it in a little way, because the world that would reject Megalopolis is the world that would need it. So he could say, I saw this coming. This is why I made the movie.
He is a man out of a movie. I mean, when you note this week too, 35 years ago, he was there with a cut of a movie called Apocalypse Now, which was also seen as, this is never going to work. Now we know its place in the culture.
And this is going to be a challenging movie. There's no doubt about it. But again, if we don't give ourselves everything to help Francis Ford Coppola, why do we want to make movies?
Well, Sam, on that optimistic note,
I'm always a downer. But it's not my fault. It's the movie business.
You're not a downer. This week, you're making a passionate case, and that's what I love about the story. I encourage everyone to read it, and especially people in Hollywood who control pocket strings and the levers of power.
It's not impossible. If you have a heart, it's not impossible.
Okay, Sam, if we're not able to see Megalopolis this weekend, what are the movies we should watch as part of our at-home Coppola Film Fest? Quick hits.
Well, obviously, everyone knows about The Godfathers and Apocalypse Now. I'd like to add a maybe lesser-known great movie, Rumblefish. I think it's one of Francis's best movies, and I think gets the closest to the side of him that you don't see in The Godfather. He called the movie an art movie for kids, and I think that's exactly what it is. Francis loves children. He's not the Godfather. He's really the camp counselor, and you see that in a movie like Rumblefish.
Sam, thank you so much. We love talking to you, especially about movies.
I love seeing you guys.
You know, Michael, I wish I were as excited about anything in life as Sam is about this movie.
It's what I love about Sam, as I used the word earlier. Column this week is passionate. His advocacy for films and movie making and its place in the culture is passionate. So it's always, he gets you going to love movies and to see movies.
Well, Michael, there's a lot to love with regards to Sam and film. There's not a lot to love with regards to our next story. Stu Heritage is taking us inside one of the worst hotels in the UK. And let me tell you, that's a pretty low bar or a pretty high bar. Whatever it is, there are a lot of bad hotels in this country. And Stu is here to explain why. Stu Heritage is writer at large for Airmail, and he's also the author of one of my favorite books, Bald, How I Slowly Learned to Not Hate Having No Hair, and You Can Too. Welcome, Stu.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good because I'm not staying at a little place in East Yorkshire. I don't think my summer holiday plans are going to take me anywhere near it. So, Stu, you've got a sort of a cringe-inducing story this week about a man named John Dixon Hart in a little inn he owns. Tell us who he is and why he's in the news this week.
Right, so yeah, there's a town in the northeast of England called Beverley, which is a lovely, very pretty town, very famous for a sort of a church, a big church it's got. And right next to the church is a guest house called the Beverley Garth Guest House. And I think it might genuinely qualify as the worst hotel in the country. John Dixon Hart, the proprietor, he was handed a 9-month suspended prison sentence. The reason he got the suspension was because he uploaded lots of misleading photos to Booking.com and Expedia and that sort of thing that made the place look out to be nice when the exact opposite was true. It's a sort of a place where the bins are full when you get there and the beds haven't been changed and there's blood on the wall, the windows are smashed. It's a really terrible place. That's bad by itself. But also, John Dixon Hart is just, I think the kind way to say it is that he's an eccentric.
That's such a Britishism, Stu. Come on. He's an eccentric lad. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of, like, he was taken to court, as you say, and some of the things that, as you said in your story this week, I kind of jaunt through his TripAdvisor page, suggests some of his eccentricities as revealed by guests. Maybe you could share some of those.
Yeah, his eccentricities include hating women a lot, refusing to talk to women on the telephone. Well, one point about 5 years ago, he made the news because he put a sign up on his front door that said, "Women are not welcome here." And so reporters went to the hotel to sort of complain. And his argument was that he's not banning them. He's not doing anything illegal. He's just saying if they do come, that they're not welcome. And that his problem with them, he said, was that they got the vote. Now, since women can vote, he's really taken against them. He's that sort of man.
I just hate suffragettes. That's what I hate.
That is kind of exactly what he said. Emmeline Pankhurst, he's on record as not being a fan of.
Well, and as one guest, as you note in your story this week, a woman said last year, I was told to F off, not how she wrote it, but for asking where I should park my car. Seems he likes to drink a lot too, as well, as you note in your reporting.
That's kind of the sad aspect of this, is that he does seem to be an enormous alcoholic. Lots of TripAdvisor reviews claim that he's, quote unquote, the town drunk and that he's been banned from all the local pubs for the trouble he causes. So what he does instead is while people stay in the hotel, he lives in a caravan in the back garden. And according to one of them, plays disco music very loudly between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. The review said, "Now, don't get me wrong, I like the Pet Shop Boys, but there's a time and a place."
It's his own little version of Glastonbury or something, I'm sure.
When I called him an eccentric, obviously that was a wild understatement. Last year, he was jailed for a month for drunken disorderly offences, basically. There are photos of him in the press wearing a top hat and a scarf and holding what appears to be a cane. He's got very few teeth in his mouth and he was giving the photographers the finger. He seems like a very, very charming man all round.
Charming man. Of course, you note that the judge sentenced him to a 9-month suspended prison sentence and said, I sometimes think you should be called Basil Fawlty. You need to prove you can run a guest house without taking the piss out of your guest. So how does he get away with a suspended sentence? It sounds like this guy is a nightmare.
Yeah, I think a nightmare is putting it lightly. I feel like the judge, a lot of his sentencing felt like a sort of this is your last chance type scenario. He seemed sort of amused. It was kind of shocking to see a judge in a court say the word piss, quite frankly. That really took me aback. Apparently, when it all started going wrong for John Dixon Hart, his wife left him. I assume that explains his problem with women as well. But in the case, he said they're back together. They're mending some of the windows. They're changing the bedding more often than they did. So
more often.
Yeah, more often.
So like once every 2 weeks.
When John Dixon Hart said that he's changing the bedding, the judge said, please wash it as well. He made a point of requesting that it be clean.
Don't just move dirty linens from one room to the other. Actually wash them in between.
Stu, I hate making sweeping generalizations, especially because you know I love the English. But is there something about this that just gets at the Englishness of this whole scandal?
The guy's got really bad teeth, so there's that. But also, it's just a sort of a quaint... I think Beverly's such a small town that he seems to be just very known. There's lots of TripAdvisor stories of him not answering. He keeps the hotel locked most of the time. And there's stories about people waiting hours and hours for him to come along. And there's just a sense that he's this local character people kind of warmly tolerate, even though he's fairly repellent. It's sort of sweet. It doesn't make me proud, especially proud to be English, but I can think of worse. I would kind of like to go to stay there, to this hotel.
Stu, we're not letting that happen. I mean, you've already gone to one of the worst hotels in the UK on behalf of Airmail. I think you took your boys there a couple of years ago, no?
I did, yeah. And in retrospect, it wasn't that bad. No one swore at me. The rooms were not covered in blood, like apparently they are here. As far as I could tell, the people there liked women. So yeah, I feel like I've really, by calling that place the worst hotel in England, I feel like I've found a new challenge.
Well, Stu, thank you so much for bringing this disastrous situation to light, and also for being so game to delve into the world of horrible hotels on our behalf. We truly appreciate it.
It's nice to have a niche, really, isn't it? I'm happy.
Again, very British. I love the attitude, Stu. All right, nice to have a niche.
This is because you spent time in London. This is what the accent's here, Michael.
Exactly.
Stu, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stu.
Not really for this story, but just for being you. Stu Heritage, ladies and gentlemen, writer-at-large for Airmail, also the author of my new favorite book, Bald, How I Slowly Learned to Not Hate Having No Hair, and you can too.
Oh, good plug. Thank you.
Bye, Stu.
Thank you.
Michael, it's enough to keep me at home for the rest of the year.
It's enough to make you say, yeah, I just don't think I want to go traveling anywhere this summer.
There's just too much uncertainty. There's too much left to chance. Like, you never know who's been in that bed bleeding before you.
Wow. Thanks for the image.
Sorry. Meanwhile, okay, we have one more story to talk about. Fathers, daughters, fortunes, lost, found, discovered.
Yeah, this is a story that if it doesn't have limited series written all over it, I don't know what does. It's the battle over the estate of a man named Mario D'Urso, an Italian banker and senator who epitomized the 1970s jet set, but had a little wrinkle in his past. He was the father of a woman named Nikki Carlson, who was adopted at birth by a family in Minnesota and then, decades later, was reunited with D'Urso in the months before he died. It's an incredible story, and James Eli Schiffer is here to tell us about it. James is a writer based in Minnesota and the author of The King of Skid Row, John Bassage, and The Twilight Years of Old Minneapolis. Welcome, James.
Thank you.
So, James, before we get into the details of this new court case and litigation, who was Mario D'Urso?
Well, Mario was the sort of face of the European jet set in the 1970s and 1980s. He came from a Neapolitan sort of aristocratic family and was kind of well known for sort of his parties. He was followed by the paparazzi, his friendships with people like Jackie Kennedy and Audrey Hepburn and many presidents and kings and other celebrities. But he was also very active in Italian politics and was sort of a fashion icon as well.
I mean, James, when I first read this story, two words came to mind. Bunga, bunga. Am I wrong?
Bunga, bunga. I have to say, in more than 30 years in journalism, this is one of the strangest stories I've ever come across.
So what was his reputation like when he was alive, and how did it change after he died?
Well, when he was alive, he was definitely an icon as a sort of someone who just loved to be in the public eye and was sort of at the side of so many sort of famous people who would show up. And he actually punched out the king of the paparazzis once, which I think was sort of a badge of honor among certain people who are pursued by those photographers. But he was also someone who sort of had a whole fashion sense that even was recognized as one of Vanity Fair's best dressed people in the world in 2011. He's sort of credited with the tailored pants and sneakers aesthetic, which he said he wore because it was comfortable, but he sort of made it classy, I guess. Everyone who knew him that I spoke to sort of appreciated that he was someone who loved to have a good time. He had friends all over the world. And this story was one that's never really been told completely before.
So in short, it turns out he had a secret daughter that no one really knew about. How did she first enter the news?
Well, she is the one who actually contacted me to begin with. And it was after she had already been in the Italian press, but it was not really noted at all in the United States. Or January 2015, Mario gets an email out of the blue, says making contact after 50 years. And it's from a woman who's 49 years old. Okay. She says, I think you're my father. I'm an American. I'm a professional. I live in Minnesota. And this comes as, for all we know, a total surprise to Mario, who has no other children, is not aware of having children. And that starts a whole new chapter in his life.
And what do we know about this secret daughter?
Well, she was adopted as a newborn, and she was born in California. And we're not aware that Mario knew that he even had a child. He knew there was a pregnancy. He said that later to her. And she grew up in suburban Minneapolis in Minnesota, and had always, was one of the points that I make with this story, is that adoptees, some of them do not care about their birth families at all, but some of them are really, really interested in where they came from. And Nikki Carlson is one of those people who was always wanting to know where she came from, convinced that she was different than the family that she grew up with in suburban Minneapolis. But she never could have imagined that this was her origin.
So how did she find out, James, who her parents were?
That is a long, twisting tale. Her birth mother tracked her down in the late 1970s, hired a private investigator to find her, and made contact with her adoptive family. But her adoptive family was not ready to introduce Nikki to her birth mother. And so it would be another 11 years before her adoptive parents told her about this. And then she was able to make contact with her birth mother. Her birth mother refused to tell her who her birth father was. And so it was another 20 plus years before she learned the name of Mario Dorso.
And what did she do when she figured out who he was?
Well, she sent him an email immediately when she found out. That started a really intense relationship, was sort of tragically cut short only 5 months later. She traveled to Europe to meet Mario in Milan, and upon arriving there and meeting him, got this terrible news that he was in fact terminally ill. So this person that she had been trying to meet for decades, suddenly she realized she was not going to have him for very long. And there were still questions. She asked him, "Are you my father?" And he said, "I think so." They spent some time together. She went to the Dorso Villa on the Amalfi Coast. Well, he said he had to go get treated for this cancer that was sort of spreading through his body. So she went to this sort of incredible place, but at the same time, she is sort of grappling with this news that this person that she had sought out for so long and turns out to be this extraordinary character is dying.
So, James, how does it change her life? I mean, she's living a completely parallel existence to his, up until this moment.
Yes, her life was always, she was also sort of a world traveler. In some ways, there seemed to be some genetic predisposition for globetrotting. She had been to Italy numerous times, and she loved Rome. She was traveling to Africa to do aid work. So she was and she was heavily involved in politics as well, and the legal system. So there were just all these interesting parallels. But of course, this was a new dimension to her life that she was eager to embrace. And immediately upon arriving in Italy and realizing that her birth father was struggling with this illness, she became kind of a caregiver for him. She was like going with him to doctor's appointments. And so she was sort of encouraging relationships among her two children with their birth grandfather. Really, she was learning Italian and getting to know this whole world that Mario lived in.
So unfortunately, Mario dies soon after they meet. There is, in fact, a large estate. There's millions of euros. There's Warhols and other paintings in this man's position. He's a man who's had relationships with Princess Margaret, among other people. He's lived a life. There's a will that is revealed, and yet nothing goes to her, right? Who does the estate go to? And then what does she decide to do?
Well, this has been one of the central sort of questions that this situation raises is sort of what is someone's legacy, right? And at the point that Nikki met Mario, she was aware that he moved in sort of exclusive circles, say, but that he was not necessarily a rich man. And yet he was sort of, when she met him in Italy, he was talking about his legacy. He was talking about the fact that he wanted to leave something for her. Well, as it turns out, and this was something that was revealed in the Italian press, because the Italian press was very interested in every aspect of Mario, including his legacy, literal legacy, he had an estate valued at 20 plus million euros. It came out that there was a will that was prepared a few weeks before his death, essentially on his deathbed, that left the money and other artwork and other possessions to a large group of people. But his newfound daughter was not one of those people, nor were some other nieces and nephew that were sort of very close to him. And in fact, the residual heir was a cousin and a number of other people who were in Mario's inner circle, including his lover, Roberto Simeoni, whose existence was kind of a mystery until his death to many people.
So what does Nikki want, James?
Well, Nikki has made it clear that it's not about the money for her. She wanted for the world to recognize that this is her family. That was her goal from the beginning. And in fact, she hasn't actually received €1 from this whole enterprise and may never, as far as we know. But that the point here is establishing that she is, in fact, part of this family. And she's a fighter. She is not a shrinking violet. And when people came out and said, you're just greedy, you're not actually part of this family, she is just not going to just take it. And even though this whole experience of her name being splashed around in the press and being sort of castigated and in court records and otherwise, there's all sorts of skullduggery that's gone on with this litigation, she is determined to stick with it to show, look, I am part of this family. I have a kinship to this, the Dorso family and its heritage. And I think she has succeeded because she has forged relationships with members of the family, and they're quite close now. And how this litigation turns out, I don't know. But the victory that she had in January of 2023, when the judge, in fact, ruled you are, under the law, as proven by science, the daughter of Mario Dorso, and you will change your name, your surname, to the family surname. That was the victory that she had been looking for.
So, James, as we leave this story, what are the two sides here?
At one level, it's a fight over who was closest to Mario, who was really in his inner circle, who wasn't. I think that what I wanted people to come away with is not necessarily that there are two sides here. It's that for Nikki and a lot of adopted people, there is this craving for belonging and acceptance. There's a feeling that they were abandoned as children and that it is crucial for them to have a birth family, to have a blood family, that it is incredibly painful to be rejected, even if it's in the guise of you shouldn't have this money, but it feels like this just rejection of you as a human being. As far as the other side, I don't know that those who at this point are kind of fighting on behalf of the original will that doesn't mention Nikki, I don't think they would say at this point that she is not a member of the family. In that respect, I think she's one. I don't know that there's another side, but I think that the question always comes, oh, well, this is all about some base motive of greed or something like that. I just don't believe.
It's a dramatic story, James, and me, because as you noted, it's about identity, it's about family, it's about finding out who you are. And I think even how she discovers that, as you touch on there in the story, and here is they find a bit of his tissue in a lung sample that was left in a hospital, and they test that, and it's 99.999997%. So it's quite dramatic, and one can only imagine that Nikki, or who now is known as Maria Nicoletta D'Urso, thanks to the Italian court, what sense of closure, completion with her own life, and finding her identity. It's a brilliant story and fantastically reported and told by you.
Thank you. I do think that she has a sense of closure at this point, even though the litigation drags on. It is the moment that she had really been hoping for her whole life.
James, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Terrific story.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, an Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
Michael, all that drama and intrigue.
Yeah, wow. And coming off of just finishing Ripley and Italy and intrigue and who's who and what's what and secrets, like I say, pretty cinematic.
Okay, Michael. Well, on that note, it's the weekend. We are released into the wild, but surely you've got a way that we can kill the time.
I do. I mean, I would second what Sam said. You take a chance to check out a Coppola movie this weekend. And secondly, Ashley, we can talk more about this next week because I have a feeling you haven't watched it yet. So I'm just going to put it out there for everyone else to get up to speed, and then we'll have a conversation next week. But it's season 3 of Hacks, the show that we all are crazy about. Gene Smart, Hannah Einbinder, they're back, season 3, and it is on Max right now. And you, my dear, what can you recommend for us?
Okay, Michael. Well, this is a fairly dark way to end the episode, but have you read Rachel Aviv's story on the Lucy Letby case in The New Yorker?
Funny you should ask. Just read it last night.
Were you able to sleep?
Definitely woke up this morning thinking about it.
Last summer, Lucy Letby was a nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital here in Northwest England. And last summer, she was convicted of murdering 7 babies when she was a neonatal nurse there. And this was a case and a trial that just gripped the UK for the 10 months that it went on, and just kind of been declared a monster by almost everybody, certainly in the news media. And then last week, Rachel Aviv published this 13,000-word story in The New Yorker all about her case that really encourages you to look at it in a different light. I found it completely gripping. I mean, the question that it raises is, are we talking about a monster here or a victim of a very flawed system, and that system being the NHS? And in the meantime, Letby is serving her sentence of 14 whole life orders for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 other babies. So it's totally fascinating. And what's also interesting about it, the subject of not very much discussion over here, is the fact that this story can't be read in the UK, which is fascinating. UK readers are blocked from reading it online because under English law, the British media are restricted in their reporting on this case because Letby has a retrial coming up this summer. So it's a fascinating story. If you're in the UK, it's very difficult to get online. I want to thank my colleague George Pendle for getting me a copy, since I don't get the print edition of The New Yorker here anymore. But it's a fascinating story and an interesting conversation. And I have a feeling we're going to be talking about it more next week. So more to come. Michael, thank you for an incredible 35 minutes. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us. And sponsor Chanel, what would we do without you? Thank you so much. Wishing you all a wonderful weekend. Michael, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. And our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. Our theme music is The Keep Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe. Enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. But in the meantime, be sure to subscribe to Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thank you again for joining us.